You know, sometimes the best way to really get a grip on a massive historical event isn't to look at the grand strategy, but to see it through the eyes of just one person. That's what we're going to do. We're heading back to November 1777 to understand the turning point of the American Revolution, not from a general's tent, but from a family farmhouse in Massachusetts.
Just imagine that. This was the world for Elizabeth Hildreth of Westford. For 2 entire months, every single day was a mix of hope and just absolute dread. This quote just captures that tension perfectly, doesn't it? The war wasn't some distant thing. It was an empty chair at the dinner table and that constant gut-wrenching feeling of not knowing.
And then one afternoon, it's over. The waiting ends. A figure appears on the road, tired, worn out. It's her husband, Lieutenant Zachariah Hildreth. He's thinner, he's been through it, but he's alive. And the relief must have been just overwhelming as their 10 children just swarmed him. A real moment of pure joy in the middle of all this chaos.
As you can imagine, word spread like wildfire. The Hildreth house fills up. And this wasn't just a family reunion, you know? This was a whole community, desperate for news. They all gathered by the fire, not for small talk, but for a first-hand account of events that were going to shape their entire lives.
And boom, there it is, the question on absolutely everyone's mind, asked by his brother Amos. Rumors had made it back home, whispers of a huge victory, but they needed to hear it from someone who was actually there. And this is the moment. A soldier starts telling the story of history to his family. This is where it all begins.
So Zachariah takes them all back. He tells them about the day the alarm bell started ringing, September 27th. General Burgoyne's British Army was pushing south from Canada like a dagger pointed right at the heart of the colonies. So General Gates put out the call for every single man they could get, and the 6th Middlesex Regiment, well, they answered.
And look how fast this all happened. These weren't professional soldiers, remember? They were farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, pulled from their fields right in the middle of harvest season. And within days, they're on the move, marching north to back up the Continental Army.
And it was a brutal march. We're talking about 150 miles over just terrible roads, all mud and ruts. If they were lucky, they got to sleep in a barn, but most of the time, it was the cold, hard ground. It took them 10 long days of nonstop marching just to get to the front lines. This quote from Zachariah, this is what makes that 150-mile number real. It wasn't just some distance on a map. It was a grueling, painful, miserable experience. This is that gritty reality of war that you don't always read about in the history books. The sheer physical toll it took just to get to the fight.
So, what did they find when they finally got there? Well, a massive American camp. Thousands of guys, all dug in on the high ground of a place called Bemis Heights. General Gates had set up this incredibly strong defensive position, and they were staring down a British army that was in some serious trouble.
Okay, what's so fascinating here is the contrast. You've got the Americans dug in, getting stronger every day, morale is high. Then you have the British. They are at the end of this long, flimsy supply line, they're running out of food, and winter's coming. The whole situation was tipping, big time, in America's favor.
Burgoyne knew he was running out of time. He couldn't just sit there, and he couldn't really retreat. So on October 7th, he rolls the dice. He launches what he called a reconnaissance in force, which is basically a fancy way of saying he sent a big chunk of his army to try and find a weak spot in the American lines. This was the gamble that was going to decide everything.
Now, Zachariah's own regiment was held in reserve, but he describes the key moment, and he gives credit where it's due. It was Benedict Arnold. Yeah, that Benedict Arnold, years before he became infamous, who actually defied orders and led this ferocious counterattack that just shattered the British and Hessian lines. He won the day.
After that disaster on October 7th, the British Army was completely broken and totally trapped, and that set the stage for something absolutely stunning.
And it happened so fast. They're defeated on the battlefield, they retreat back to their camp, and bam, the Americans surround them. Escape was impossible, their supplies were gone, General Burgoyne had no choice. After a few short negotiations, he agreed to do the unthinkable. He surrendered his entire army.
Just let that number sink in for a second. Nearly 7,000 professional British and Hessian soldiers surrendered. This wasn't some small skirmish. This was the capture of an entire British army in the field. The scale of this victory was just mind-boggling, and it sent shockwaves all the way across the Atlantic.
And this is what it all comes down to, right here in Zachariah's own words. This is the emotional heart of the victory.
Can you imagine standing in those lines, a farmer from Massachusetts, and watching the most powerful army on the planet lay down its weapons in front of you? It was the moment they realized, wow, we can actually win this thing.
So what did it all mean? Back in that farmhouse, the story of the battle itself is over, but the questions about what it all meant, they were just getting started. This win was about so much more than just one campaign.
And then, a child's question. So simple, so hopeful. And Zachariah's answer is honest. No, the war wasn't over, not by a long shot. The British still held major cities, and there was a lot of fighting to come. But something fundamental had changed.
This is why everyone calls Saratoga the turning point. First, it proved to the Americans themselves that they could stand up to British regulars in a real battle and win. But the biggest deal? It convinced France that the American cause wasn't a lost one. This victory is what got the French to officially join the war, bringing their navy, their money, and their troops. And that alliance, that's what would ultimately guarantee American independence.
As the night winds down, the conversation gets personal again. You see, for Zachariah, being an officer wasn't about glory. It was about this heavy weight of leading his own friends and neighbors into battle, making decisions that could get them killed. Those community bonds were the glue that held that whole army together.
Which brings us to the ultimate question, right? It wasn't just about taxes or some abstract political debate. For these guys, the ones who marched 150 miles with blisters on their blisters, what was the real motivation? What was it all for?
And there's your answer. It all boils down to something so personal and so powerful. The right to live freely on your own land and to build a better future for your kids. Zachariah's story is a perfect reminder that the grand sweep of history is really built on the foundation of individual lives and that profound hope for a better world.